Classroom Pro. I'm one of the mentors here, and I wanted to go over the very, very, very basics of Lightroom. I know that a lot of you are just getting started with editing and you're not really sure if you want to choose Photoshop or Lightroom. Lightroom definitely tends to be the easier of the two programs, only because it's sort of geared towards photographers, and you can do a lot of things like batch editing and just make really basic adjustments, whereas Photoshop is really more for like details and those small adjustments that you don't necessarily need. So I'm not going to edit fully here for you, but I just want to give you the basics to show you that it really is so easy. Once you kind of navigate the program, you can get through a session, like a portrait session, in 15 to 20 minutes with editing. So really cutting down on your time is so important, and still delivering amazing photos. So let me start here. This is the library module, and this is where you import your photos. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but it's really cool because there's a little catalog here with dates, and obviously you can name these as well. These are the ones on the desktop. So you import this way. It's going to ask you where you want to get your images from. So usually I cull first, I put all the raws on my desktop, and then what I do is I'll just like pull them in. And I've actually already imported this. So you just select all of these and you go ahead and import. I'm not going to do that just because it's already there. So I'm going to cancel this, but these are some photos that I actually suckered out of our photographer while on vacation. He gave me all the raw images, which we sort of preach not doing, because then they get all the outtakes. But I have culled these and I'm just kind of going through them. So the actual place that you do the editing is in the develop module here. I do not use the map, book, slideshow, print, or web modules 99% of the time. So I'm not really going to cover these. I just want to show you here how to actually edit the photos. So maybe I'll find a more awkward photo of us that I posted in the group here. This is us being absolutely ridiculous, and it was so funny. Look at my husband and my daughter. Okay, so let's take this image, for example. Right here on the left-hand side is where you'll find you can import presets. So the ones that I fall back on all the time, and I am not just saying this because I now work as a mentor, is the Kohl's Crisp and Clean presets and the Bright and Airy presets. I love so, so much. So I actually still use them. I've created my own preset as well. So this is where those are located. And so what presets are, if you don't know, I'm sure most of you do, is that they're actually preset adjustments that it's one click, and you'll see here when I click on this, for example, do you see all the adjustments are automatically made? So you can actually apply this to all of your photos, and then you make slight adjustments here. So I am actually, let's see here, I'm gonna go back to the before image, or let's see, I'll undo the preset. So let's go over here. I'm going to close this down. Let's go over to here to the right side. So what this is here is a histogram. I actually don't worry about this a ton. It kind of shows exposure, and then it also shows areas of, if you click on these two, it'll show you where your highlights are blown out and where you lose details in the dark. So this it's good to know about. I don't look at it, to be honest. This right here is where it's going to show you your settings. So this was taken at ISO 100, 24 millimeters, f4.0, and at 1/1250th of a second. This is just interesting to see, just for yourself, to see if it's a little soft. For example, your image is out of focus, you can kind of diagnose why. For example, he used a very high shutter here because he needed to capture us jumping. Say he were to have used 1/100th of a second, it would have been blurry and you would see motion blur. So let me go over these tools. This right here is where you make adjustments on your horizon. Remember, we want to make sure that our horizons are level, which in some cases can be difficult, but like this, you make a small adjustment. This right here is where you can actually, it's like a healing tool. So let's say I wanted to get rid of this boat here in the background. What it's going to do is pull from the same color scheme and lines. So for example, you see how this image here was replaced. Lightroom does a really good job of choosing pixels that are very similar to the area you're trying to cover up. So what it's going to do, this is a clone or heal. They're very similar, and then you can change the size, you can change the feathering. In this case, I don't need a lot of feathering, and if you want to cover something completely, obviously you want it to be at 100% opacity. So if I click enter, do you see how that disappeared? And then, well, you can kind of see right there, it obviously didn't match perfectly, but it's pretty good. I would probably not use that. But again, if you're just looking at the image, you can maybe get away with it. Not in this case. You can see the discoloration a little bit. So in this case, I would probably redo that, but I just wanted to give you a general covering of what that is. So this is for the red eye. I never ever use it, to be honest. This right here is a gradient tool. So if you have anything, for example, you would like to, let's see here. I have a bunch of these actions, which you can download from different companies. I think Kohl's Classroom has a few. I want to say that some of these are that. So for example, this is a sky enhancer, or you can also just choose exposure. Let's just do exposure. So if you want to up the exposure, and then the gradient tool here comes up, do you see how the sand increased in its exposure by one stop here? I would probably not do it as much here, but say 0.50 or 0.501. So that's the gradient tool, and you can see that you can do it with the sky or from the bottom of the sand, or if you need light on one side versus another, it's a really great tool. This right here is you have the option to do like vignetting, which I think is a little outdated at this point, but it's totally up to you. You can go down here and actually invert the selection. So for example, if you need light on the face, you can kind of use this tool to create a patch of extra lighting if you don't have external lighting. Again, it's not going to be as natural as if you actually used proper lighting or off-camera flash. But honestly, it does work in some cases to kind of add a little extra light when you need it. And to the untrained eye, sometimes it's really hard to notice, so I do use that sometimes. Okay, that is that. This is like a little brush tool that you can use. For example, if the exposure is up, you see how I'm like highlighting certain areas, so you can brush over. I'm gonna delete that. So you can select this actually, and you'll see that it'll show in red here, and then you can actually just hit delete and it will disappear. Okay, so on to the actual module here. This brush is used for white balance. So what you want to do is choose some color that is very similar in the numbers at the bottom, the red, green, and blue. You want to pick a target that is as similar in number with all three of these values. For example, if it was like 60 across the board, that would be a good sample to take. You can see up in the left-hand corner up here, when I choose this, do you see how it's changing? So when I pick something blue, it's countering with more yellows in the temperature section. So you can actually manually change the white balance, or what you can do is use this dropper tool, and the dropper tool is pretty good, I'd say. I tend to do it by hand mostly, but do you see the values here? 61.1, 61.7, 62.7. That's pretty darn close. And so if I click on this, it's going to warm up my image just a little bit. It's totally up to you what you like versus what you don't like. I prefer my images a little on the warmer side. And what you can do is also change these values by hand. So this here is 0, and then I kind of like it at 0. It's a little too warm. Maybe bump it up 2% or +2. The tint is going to sort of get the values of the greens and magentas. So for example, this looks pretty spot on to me. It might be a little too on the magenta side. And don't worry if you don't see this yet. As you continue to edit over years and years and years, you'll know what your images need and don't need. I was just beginning with Lightroom and I was like, how do people know what the heck to adjust just by looking at the image? But I promise you, as you go, you will start to see it. So I see a little bit of the magenta and I'm going to pull that out and bring it down to 0 again. But let me show you here. See how it turns bright green and bright magenta, and then right in the middle is kind of perfect, and you can adjust this as you wish. So exposure here obviously makes it either darker or lighter. I prefer my images a little bit on the lighter side, so I think this is pretty good. Properly exposed, I might bump it up a little bit. Contrast is going to bring out details. It's going to make your image a little bit darker. As you can see, the contrast is really, really heavy versus this kind of faded, I don't know, blurred look, but I tend to keep it in the middle. Highlights, you're looking for the bright spots in your images. Now, highlights are going to be in water, in sky, on things like sand, and you'll notice it on the skin. So when you drop the highlights here, it's going to take away those bright spots versus when you lift them, it's going to bring out those bright spots. So it really depends on the editing that you like to do. When the sun is a little bit too harsh and you notice harsh shadows on the face, bright spots on the clothing or the hair, you're going to want to drop your highlights. Shadows will bring up any darkness in your image. So you see how the greens go from like being really dark to you're lifting out that heaviness versus bringing down the shadows. It's really darkening the already dark aspects of your image. So I prefer to have my shadows a little bit lighter. In this case, I like highlights. No, you don't have to edit like I do. I like the bright and airy style. So I'm just going to edit this image as I would normally. Whites are going to make the whites brighter. And then if you bring it down, it's going to strip away the white. Do you see how that's working here? Obviously, you don't want it like that. You're going to have to find a nice middle balance, but I like it a little on the higher side. And then the blacks are blacks. You just literally lift out the darkness of the blacks, or you make them heavier, and then you'll see the dark parts of the image will be even darker. So I like it kind of in the middle, if not a little bit higher. Clarity is just that. It's very much like contrast. It's going to sort of sharpen your image, but I like it right in the middle. I don't tend to mess with it. Dehaze is really cool. It's new in Lightroom. It's something that I've actually started to use a little bit. It's kind of like a mix of contrast and clarity and vibrancy all in one. I tend to bump it up a little bit just to bring out the details a tad more. The vibrance, you can see, makes it vibrant. What I will say about vibrance, because I used to be a little heavy on the vibrance and saturation, you'll notice that if you do that, it might look okay on your computer screen, but unfortunately when you print, it's not going to look natural. I learned the hard way. It's not exactly what you want on your wall. It might work for Instagram, but keeping it as natural as possible is really the way to go. This right here is the tone curve. Now you can choose to like lift certain things, and you'll see right here it says lights, darks, highlights, whatever. I ignore that completely. What I do use is the actual sliders in this region. I mess with it. So the highlights in this region are sort of the undertones. They're a little bit less detailed, but they still make a huge difference. So in this case, I like them a little bit brighter. I like my lights lighter, my darks lighter. Do you see how that's brightening an image? And then you can make it, you know, your shadows down a little bit to bring out some of the detail. But it is this section. A lot of people don't use it, but I found it's really helpful to tweak it ever so slightly to add more depth to color and things like that. Honestly, no idea what this is. Don't use it. So I've gotten away with that thus far. The color slider is really interesting. So you can choose any one of these colors. I'm going to use blue just because it's easy to show you. So you can see the hue is really the color gradient of the blues. So do you see how that's more teal and then this is like a purplish blue color? Obviously you want to keep it natural, but you can sort of tweak it a little bit to make it, you know, however you want. I tend to keep it at 0. Saturation will strip out the color altogether versus adding more. So again, you don't really want to mess with this unless you're noticing that you need a little pop in a certain color. Or, for example, I use the blues to strip out gray skin tones. If you have gray skin tones that look bluish gray and you cannot get it to work with your white balance, I will actually take out some of the saturation of the blues, which only works if there is no other blue in the image. I'll probably do a separate tutorial for this, but it's really kind of a fun trick to do when you're noticing that your skin tones just look a little gray and boring. Taking away the blue color will actually kind of bring it back to life. So you can do this for all the colors here. This will give you the reds, orange, yellow, green, aqua, blue, purple, magenta. So you can really tweak individual colors. I'll show you here. So let's see if the magenta, there's no like, I would guess the red would be more like pink. So see, take a look at my shorts and my daughter's dresses. So you can really play with the colors individually, which is really kind of cool. I'm going to kind of condense this here and just go back to one color. Split toning I love for skin tones. I have a separate tutorial for that, but what you do if you end up noticing that your skin tones are a little bit on the pale side and you want to add more color, what I do is add a numerical value. And unfortunately with the sand, it's going to add a little bit of a tint as well, but it does add to the skin tones. I do use this quite a bit, but in this case I would not. You can also do that in the shadows. Detail here is all about sharpening. You can sharpen your image, which is really cool, and then reduce the noise as well. So if you find that you have a lot of grain in your image from having a high ISO, this is a great way to kind of soften the image so it's not as grainy. Sharpening will work to a certain extent as well. If you notice that it's just a tad soft, it might be able to recover the image, but it won't work, unfortunately, for those images that are really out of focus. That is the one thing, unfortunately, that you cannot fix in post-processing. So keep that in mind, but this is a really great tool to kind of hone in the little details and get them really sharp. Lens correction I actually use. Watch what happens when I hit profile corrections. You see, it's just a little bit lighter. What it does is it takes, for example, if you're shooting with a wide angle lens, like in this case 24 millimeter, you can't see it when you look at the image, but it actually is a little bit curved due to the lens. So what it does with this profile correction is it basically flattens the image. So with some, in this case, you can't see a big difference, but when I use my 35 millimeter, I'll notice a big sort of pop in my images, and it does really kind of help flatten the image and give it a little bit more dimension. Chromatic aberration is something when you're like blowing out your highlights and you'll start to see that outline of the purple. It almost like looks like a purple highlight. And so chromatic aberration will happen when there's a really harsh light. And when you click on that, I mean, you don't really need it in most cases, but if you see like a little fuzziness of purple somewhere on your image, that's a great option to click. Other than that, I do not use the rest of this here. And so that is the basic editing. You can also right here show your images next to each other. That was the before. This is the after. Up here, you can create it here. Let's see, what did I do? So you put it, where did I go back? So this is full screen. You can get it to fill the frame here. You can get it to zoom in quite a bit. I don't know how. Oh, love their faces. And then different zooming options here. So I obviously do it just to fit so I can see the whole image at once. Again, these are all the presets that I use sometimes. Most of the time I just hand edit. And then what you can do here also is highlight a bunch of images. And then what you can do is sync the images. And then all of the color corrections will sync together, which is really freaking cool if you can see at the bottom here. So now all of the settings are the same. So I wouldn't necessarily, oh gosh, deliver all of these images to my clients, but I did get the raws and I was really excited because I love to edit. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions about anything regarding Lightroom. I have been using it for years now and I absolutely love it. I would say that I do 99% of my editing in Lightroom. Only when I can't eliminate things in the background or if I have a major correction will I pull it into Photoshop. So let me know if this helps, if you have any questions, and thanks so much for hanging out with me. Bye.